Welcome back, coders. This is video 7 in the series, and today we just have a quick video where we learn how to replace the Bootstrap UI that came with the .NET Angular template we initially used with the Angular Material UI, which we'll continue to use throughout the rest of the series. So let's get started. Alright, we're back in the code. Before we get started, make sure you check any of your changes that might be pending into your source control. And I just wanted to mention, if you've been following the series, that the last video we went ahead and did some entity framework stuff, got a couple of test database tables. I removed those for my project. Besides the names of them, we weren't going to use those again anyway. And go ahead and open up your terminal. So the first thing that we need to do is remove the actual packages that came for Bootstrap. So unless you plan on using jQuery or popper.js later, I'm just going to remove them all at one time. I don't plan on using them myself. So we'll remove Bootstrap, and we can do these all on one line. jQuery, I haven't found a need for jQuery in quite a few years now. And then also popper.js. And popper.js is like a tooltips or a popover library, if you're familiar with anything like that. So Material UI actually has one of its own that we'll be using. So go ahead and hit enter. Okay, those should be removed now. You shouldn't see them in your packages.js anymore. If you've seen other tutorials and they're mentioning typing -- save at the end, you can still do that, but it really hasn't been necessary for quite a while now. It's gonna do the save regardless. The next thing we want to do is to go ahead and add the next version for the material library. So go ahead and do, I was gonna do npm, but let's do ng. Let's do it the right way, and we'll actually get a little bit of a wizard once we install it. So I'm going to install 13.3.3, which is the version I'm on. If you leave off the version, you'll get the latest one, and depending on how far that is away from your Angular, the rest of your libraries for Angular, that could potentially cause some issues. So I recommend always using the same version as the rest of your library for Angular, but if you leave it off, there is a chance that you can get the latest and it might work okay. Let's go ahead and hit enter on that, and we'll wait, and we should get a little nifty wizard. So you can see it's just asking to confirm the package and the version. We'll proceed. Okay, the next thing that it's asking us to do is just to pick a default template. We'll definitely replace this in another video. I really just wanted to get you guys into it. So I would just randomly pick pink, blue, gray. Feel free to pick whatever you want. For setting up the global Angular material typography styles, I recommend you do yes as well, unless you have other preferences. Set up browser animations. We'll go ahead and set those up for now. It's not too hard to remove or change any of the options that you're doing here later. And you could just run the ng add again, I believe, to get it to come back up again. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 files updated. It went ahead and added some stuff to the app module. Let's go ahead and review those, just so everybody can see what changed. So we've got the Angular CDK, which is like, I guess it's what they built material on top of that other people could have potentially used to build different libraries for the UI. I think it has a lot of the interactivity between the HTML elements and stuff like that, though. Don't quote me. Next thing we got is the index.html, and you can see here this was if you answered yes to the typography. This is going to bring in, looks like the material icons. which is a whole library of free icons you can use on your website that are, I believe they're the SVG type, and they can be sized and should look good over any sizes and colors. And then you've got a default font, the Roboto. Okay, and it just added a line to pre-connect to the fonts.gstatic.com. Not sure I've ever seen that before. That may be relatively new. I don't normally include the wizard items myself. And then in the styles.scss, it just went ahead and added HTML and body tags, just with the default font, and it looks like it wanted the height to be 100%. Okay, and in the app module, we got the browser animations. So perfect. Let's see what we got in the... Okay, it added the styles into our angular.json, which is great, and it actually gives us a good opportunity. We're going to need to remove the Bootstrap UI CSS files, so go ahead and remove that line. And if it's not down here in the test, we should be okay. Perfect. Okay, we can save that. And I think that was everything. So I guess the next thing we should probably do is we'll just run it, and you can kind of see it's going to look a little silly right now because we haven't applied any material UI items to the website yet. And in addition to that, all the classes and everything are still in the HTML that are related to Bootstrap. So we're not going to have a good style at the moment, but we just want to make sure everything still works. We don't have any new errors. Looks like I've got two windows showing up for you guys. There we go. Okay, so we've got a pretty horrendous website right now, but it did come up. It did not have any errors, and let's work on fixing that. Go ahead and stop debugging. All right, now we're in the code. So the first thing I've already laid out all of the HTML and the CSS just to make a working replacement of the old style that was applied to the website. It's not exactly a one-for-one, but it's just something quick and dirty to actually get it switched over. So we're going to import the matte toolbar module and the matte button module from the Angular material library. Just add angular/material and then /toolbar or button or anything that you're trying to import from the material library. It's all following that same naming convention. And the reason you imported them into this file is so you could import them into our app module. So under the imports, just go ahead and place those in there. Anywhere in there works. And save your changes. Once you've got those, let's flip over to our app component.html. And we're just going to replace the container class with a site-container. And that's just something to make it a little bit less, generic, something that won't be reused and modified by somebody else later. And in this case, we could come into our app component.ts, we could put the style URLs, and we could just create an app.component.scss. But instead of doing that for now, I don't want this to be about too many other things. What we're going to do is just take that and go to our styles.scss. And while we're in here, you can see that this was updated by that template that we had, the Angular material wizard that we went through. And then we've got a class called flex spacer. It's just flex grow of 1, flex shrink of 1, and then the auto for the flex spaces. And flexbox is what I mean when I say flex. If you Google flexbox, you'll see, if you're not familiar with it, it'll open up a whole new simple world for you on styling these websites or positioning these websites and keeping things looking the way you want from a layout standpoint. And then we've got the site container class, and I just threw 20 padding on there just to keep all the text and everything away from the sides of the, browser. Okay, so we did our styles, we did our app module, app component. The next thing we need to do is flip over to our nav menu.component.scss, and we're just going to replace all the style in there with what I've got up on my screen, and we'll go through it. I just replaced that header brand. I don't even remember if it was named that or not. If you've got a header brand there, it should be exactly the same already. If not, just rename the old class. And then we've got the nav wrapper, and we've got a display of flex, which is going to enable all those flexbox features I was just talking about. We've got a font size of 14 pixels. Maybe let's do 16. Let's make it a little big. And then I've got a gap, which is going to be more or less a padding between each of the links that we put in there. But with the gap, we're just not going to have to worry about like extra padding hanging off to the right if we were to apply some like right padding or something like that, or worry about applying a special selector to make it not apply to the last one or something like that. Gap is just a simpler way of doing it. And then inside of the nav wrapper, I like to keep the nesting going pretty much. We've got the nav item, which is our link, our A tag, and then what we've got there is a color of white. Now, depending on the theme that you selected in the wizard, you might want to go with a different type, but this is just going to be the color of our links up at the top. And then we've got the link active, and this is going to be a class that's applied to whichever link matches the current URL that we're at. So if we're at the home page, the link active is going to be applied to that link. If we're at the /counter, then the counter will have the link active applied to it. So if you've got all that punched in, go ahead and save your changes. And we're browsing over to the HTML now. So I replaced everything in here more or less. But you can see the first component of note is the matte toolbar. And we've got that enabled now because we imported the matte toolbar module into our app component. So we don't have to flip over there and do that now. And then we've got the color equals primary. Now the primary color was assigned when you went through the wizard and you selected that theme again. Whatever the color on the left was, in mine I believe it was pink, then my primary color is going to be pink. So we want the color of the toolbar, the header up there on the website to just be our primary color. And then we've got that header brand that we talked about. That's just a space with the site name inside of it. In my case, I put SB tutorial. And then we've got a div with the flex spacer. And that flex spacer was the class that we had put in our styles.scss that we had put on the flex grow of 1, shrink of 1, and flex basis of auto. And that's just going to, again, it's going to eat up all of the width in our title bar that wasn't used up by the other ones. And so if we didn't have this flex spacer in there, we'd have our site name and we'd have the links for it coming directly after. So instead of worrying about trying to align the links to the right, by assigning it to the div, we just went ahead and threw a flex spacer in there. And that's the whole reason we made this, is so we can reuse this anytime we just want to force things apart to take up the full site's width or height, depending on the orientation that we have our flex going in. Now, I don't know if I mentioned this, but again, flex is not part of the material library. And Angular actually has a library that's called the flex layout, and it just provides more in line with the component and the properties way of doing it. But I like still doing the CSS way just because I feel like it's way more reusable. You don't want to have to be putting, these properties, or at least I don't like to be putting the properties all over my HTML for it when I can just assign a class. And then I think I said we've got the nav wrapper. That's just going to be a container for all of the links. So then we've got the links. We've got just a normal A tag, except for instead of a href property with our URL, we're using the router link, and we're just setting that router link to an array with one item that just is the / for our home page. Then we've got the router link active, and that's going to actually do the searching of the current URL that we're at versus this router link and assign the link active. Now, because all of our pages actually start with /, it's our home page by default, but there's also a / counter and a / fetch data. All of those by the default settings would actually make the link active apply to the home page because they all start with a /. So by default, it's set up to just match, like starts with whatever you've got in there. And in order to avoid that, we're going to say that the router link active options to only assign that router link active if it exactly matches, meaning the whole URL has to be just / in order for our home page to apply that link active tag class. And then we've got the counter and the fetch data. And you can see that those don't have the router link options, but they're set up exactly the same as the other one, just with their routes. So go ahead and save your changes there. And the last thing is just a real quick stop in because we wanted to replace the button on the counter with the material style button. So your counter.component.html. What we've just done is we've added the directive for mat-raise-button. There's also just mat button, which is it's a different style, but it doesn't pop out like the normal buttons you'd expect. The mat raised button is kind of the more standard button. There's also like a mat icon button and just like I said, mat dash button, which is a more flat one. And then we've got the color equals primary. That's going to be it's going to be used by this mat raised button. So again, I'm going to make the buttons the same color as the nav bar. In my case, they're going to be that hot pink. You just want to go ahead and start running the website. I've already got it up, but let me go ahead and start it back up again. There we go. And you can see that beautiful pink bar going across the top. It's got our site name on the left, and it's got our links on the right, and that was the flex spacer that we had added. And then you can see the home is not underlined because that's the current URL that we're at. And if we click over to counter, you can see that we've got a pink button. It still works exactly like it used to. And then fetch data the same way. As we go to these links, we didn't actually make them not links. We just went ahead and removed the underline just to make it kind of a little indicator of where we were at. And with that, you've got a website up and running on Angular material. You've gotten rid of the Bootstrap, and you're on your way. Have fun, and I'll see you in the next video.